some of you know that everything is going digital, and now what a pleasure to see the New York Times in print in Singapore. And I wanted to show you that, here's a big story on tourism in Iceland, how tourism transforms Iceland's capital. And this is something that in the past, most people, in your industry would be thrilled to see in the New York Times. And that would be the only place and the place to be. And today, the media landscape as we know it has really, really changed. And today, we have 3 experts with me who have thought a lot about the idea of how do we get the story out and whether we still need the New York Times. I believe we do, but let's hear from our 3 experts who can talk about the changes that are going on and how we can help you all get your message out. So with me today are 3 experts: Anna Nash, Head of Global Public Relations at Aman. Anna. Yes, and Melanie Brandman, Founder and CEO of Brandman Agency. And Paul Hicks, CEO of GHC Asia. And yes, so Paul comes from Hong Kong, Melanie from New York, and Anna from London. And between them, they have lots of experience. And my first question is, how has the social media landscape changed your lives? So take it away, Anna.
Thank you, Ching Ching. And everybody, welcome back to this very social conference. And I think on that topic of social, we want to just address how our jobs have changed for the better, how they've become perhaps more complex. So let me lead in before I pass to Melanie. And I think that the digital landscape has evolved very, very quickly. 2004 saw Facebook launch. None of us, I believe, would have had any kind of digital social media account before that time. So it's all very, very recent. And with that has become the rise of citizen journalism. So every single one of you here on your phones right now, you are technically journalists. You have a public voice. You have a platform in which to speak and air your views and your trends, your likes and dislikes. What does that mean for us as a luxury travel business? That means for the first time, we have had real-time engagement with our customers 24/7. We are open all day, every day, receiving information, communication from our customers. So we need to somehow digest that with a two-way communication, which is new and something that I believe that we're learning. And I believe that social will not wait. It is here. We need to embrace it. Melanie, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, absolutely. I think that it's obvious that our roles have become incredibly busy and complex, and I always joke. I've been doing this for 20 years plus, but I'm not going to go into that. And for 20 plus years, I've been trying to explain to my parents what I actually do. So now I have to totally give up explaining, because now with all the additional things that we're doing, there's absolutely no way that I can explain to my mother's generation. But that aside, indeed, our roles have become much more complex, but I believe in a fantastic way, and I embrace social media. I love what it does for us on behalf of our clients. But the one thing that we always need to understand is that there must be a balance with everything that we do. And whilst we love print media, and it does give the credibility, such as the New York Times, Ching Ching gives wonderful credibility to our clients, but we're also in a bit of a situation now where we can sort of almost bypass, I hate to say bypass media, but we have an opportunity now through social media to talk directly to the consumers, to the customers of our clients, to help them craft their narrative without it being edited, on point, and coming out on a regular basis, and consistency. So that is indeed a great benefit that social media has given us. But again, a lot of work goes into making that happen.
It does.
And we'll get on to influencers later. That's a whole other subject.
Well, I can certainly agree with Melanie and Anna that our lives have become a lot more complicated, and we're having to work a lot harder than we used to before. Clients are expecting us to do a lot more things for them than they used to do, and unfortunately the fees are not necessarily going up in proportion. So we have to spread ourselves a lot more thinly to try and achieve a lot more tasks. I guess the major difference is what's happened in the last few years is that before we very much worked with journalists and with the traditional media, and everything very much went through them. But now we work alongside those with other people who are influential online, so bloggers and influencers and so on. And we also handle channels direct for clients, where we're talking directly to the consumer through managing their own content. So it's definitely become a lot more complicated. I personally believe that the print and traditional media is still very, very important. I know when James was telling us earlier about NYT, he was saying that social media is the way that they've built their following and why so many people know about them. But he also very proudly mentioned being #1 voted by Travel and Leisure, and I think that's still very important to him, very important to the reputation of his resort. And probably social media is the way that most people will know about that, rather than necessarily seeing it for the first time in Travel and Leisure. But the way those two work together is very powerful.
Telling them on Facebook Live now, so
Technology.
Can I ask also if anybody with the phone is now a reviewer and an editor, so how do you deal with a bad review?
How do you deal with a bad review? Well, I think digital and having an online presence is building up trust and having a constant communication with your customers. So I think we should all benefit with a better understanding of who we're talking to. So how do you deal with a complaint? You can talk to them directly. We as a brand would rather discuss that offline. And because our hotels are very small, we can often pick out who is complaining. Sometimes if they're on property, we can actually pull it back and over-exceed their expectations by correcting the problem that we might have had. So I think there's pluses and minuses to the fact.
Can you give an example?
We could have, let me think about this, perhaps in one of the resorts the air conditioning wasn't working as it should. Somebody would speak about that in the public sphere. My team in London and on property are constantly monitoring the channels. So we're able to call the general manager and explain that you've got a guest in residence, they have an issue, and they'll be able to actually pick up with the guest directly and turn it around. So it is out there, you have to take it seriously, and I think social media before was a hobby, and I believe now as a business we need to actually start taking it seriously. And in the years gone by, it was just part of a team, and somebody would pick it up. And very topical today is my team, PR based in London. We've actually taken over the social media from the marketing team, and that brings us on later to storytelling and owning the voice and the conversations, and perhaps that could be the complaints and how best to deal with them.
And another thing, if I can just jump in on that, it's really important that you own your owned channels. These are probably some of the most valuable channels that you'll have to communicate directly to your customer. They're already loyal because they're following you, or they're interested in you because they're following you, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, wherever it may be. You own them, you must invest in them. And when I say invest in them, you must also look at how you're putting your content out. Are you doing social first content? Is it content that's being developed specifically for these channels? Because it should be. Do you have, are you posting on a regular basis, not over posting? My point to come back to what you were saying, Ching Ching, one bad review will be mitigated by 100 fantastic things that you have on your channels. And I think people aren't stupid, and they will see that someone's just had a bad day perhaps. So obviously you need to address it, and if you can address it at the service level at the hotel before or at the product before it becomes an issue.
Correct.
But sometimes you can't when you're asleep or someone's not watching the feed. So try and I would want to say invest in your asset. It's going to be one of your most powerful assets moving forward.
I think that's right. I mean, a negative review is a useful tool in many ways to get feedback from things that maybe haven't gone well. And I think we've done some work with TripAdvisor before, and in the early days when hoteliers were very suspicious of them and didn't really like the idea of this platform that could give all sorts of scathing and negative remarks. But actually, if you analyze TripAdvisor, the vast majority of things that people say are positive. People generally like to share things that are good, that they had a good experience, and they want other people to know that, and they like to sort of praise things that they feel deserve it. And when you see a negative review in that context, it's not really very damaging if it's just a one-off. I mean, we all know that there's someone who's difficult who's going to complain, even if things are generally quite good. But if you have a series of them, then that's an issue.
You can see the pattern on the chart.
That's right, and it's a signal that you need to have a look at your operations.
That's right.
I mean, just one more point on that. As a PR agency, we do a lot of work with restaurants, so we often get the phone call when there's a bad review. What are you going to do about that bad review? And it's really more, what are you going to do about that bad review? Because it's really more of an operational thing.
So earlier in the panel, somebody had said that we're going to keep our customers so busy that they won't have time to take pictures. Remember that? And
Why would you want to do that?
Sorry?
Why would you want to do that? Pictures sell
1,000 words. So
yeah.
I wanted you to address that, because how do you manage your social profile without pictures? And how important are pictures?
I have this, my new favorite thing is that visual literacy is exploding. And by that I mean that everybody has a camera, everyone's becoming literate through images, and Instagram is one of our most valuable tools to sell the dream, and that's what we're doing. We're selling the dream, we're selling the destination, we're selling the desire and the storytelling, and it all comes full circle, and images are the way in which there is a democracy amongst everyone, and so they can share their dream without having, and even if they don't speak the mother tongue or English or whatever it may be. So I think it's critical that we do provide opportunities for them to be our ambassadors and to photograph every nook and cranny if it's fantastic.
Actually, what we've done sometimes is try to coach clients to engage with their operational staff about facilitating social media. There are ways you can take photos or help them take photos so that you can maybe show a bit of branding as well in the picture.
And
or help them to use the company hashtags.
Try now, and she has a special lens.
I'm going to take this picture, and I hope you all retweet it. If I tweet this, I hope you all retweet this, because whatever it is that you find interesting is better if you put a picture with it when you tweet it, because people all like pictures, right?
Absolutely, and I think it goes back to, very traditionally, we had to go and find customers and really be very, very proactive on the channels perhaps that they were. And I think nowadays everybody is on Instagram or Facebook or WeChat in China. So it's very easy for us to message, but then at the same time, it's very easy to lose that message. So you've got to own that brand voice, as Mel said earlier, and make sure that it's consistent, it's topical, it's new, it's relevant. And I think that we're very lucky that we have guests that go to our resorts, beautiful destinations across the world, and they want to film themselves, shoot themselves within those and create memories.
I mean, a great example is, we were talking about this the other night. Let's just take a simple hotel opening, but I mean, I know there is no simple hotel opening. I've probably been involved in about
You're underselling us
50
there.
or 60 or 70 of them, but let's say 8 years ago, Anna and I were chatting. It was, the first thing we did was 6 months out, we would start to secure the exclusive print stories. And then we'd wait until opening, and then it was the big reveal. Now, we have to put together a strategy that talks to the print strategy. What are we going to do about the owned channels? At what point do they become live? And at what point do we start to slowly drip feed information so that the market isn't saturated before the hotel is even open? And then we have influencers with a camera or trade press trying to sneak in and take photos and ruin it all for us. But actually, it's a huge opportunity. And so I think it really comes down to being prepared.
Yes.
Treating your social media is media, and that is, I think, a key message that we want to get out here today. So we have to approach this media as we would traditional media, and it's neither one or the other. And they all have to work in tandem and be fully integrated to really deliver a proper 360 approach to any
Absolutely.
plan or message or process that you're doing.
And I think, as Mark Zuckerberg once said, the biggest risk is not taking a risk. So I think as a brand, Aman, I can speak from experience, we've always tried to shield ourselves, keep ourselves very, very hidden. But I think even we realize that the audience is out there, we have to tap into them. And that's the greatest benefit of social media, as Melanie said, is that it's right here, it's right now. You can turn those taps on so that they're in line with the ebb and flow of a business need when you need to. And I think that it's a great way to convey and speak to your customers about your brand image and help perhaps shape your brand. If you're not quite sure, you can get the best feedback from customers.
I think one of the challenges has always been for us, particularly as external PR consultants with social media, is the degree to which the clients can control the message and the time frame involved in that. Because normally we write press materials, they go through layers of approval before they come back and before they can be distributed. But obviously, social media doesn't work as slowly as that. So, I mean, to some extent, we do put forward editorial calendars and we sort of put content out that's planned in advance. But to be very effective, social's got to be a lot more quick off the mark and sort of respond to things that are happening now.
I mean, we can plan 2, 3, 4 weeks out on the postings that we're going to do on behalf of our clients, but at the same time, we need to be nimble. We need to pivot on a dime if something happens in the marketplace or there is indeed a crisis of something, and you can't be selling honeymoon packages when there's a crisis. You need to see when you need to go dark or when you need to control the messaging. But I still think, one of the biggest challenges, I think, as PR professionals as well, getting back to how it's changed our jobs, Ching, is how much of our time do we focus on traditional media? How much of our time do we focus on, it's no longer new media, on social media? How much time do we spend on influencers, creating content? There are so many aspects to it now, and I think it's a conversation that you need to have with your PR and sales and marketing teams on how you best share that time to get the best results and the best return on your investment as well.
Okay, so talk to us about influencers. You said that not
My favorite.
all influencers are not made equal, and I like to think the New York Times is the most important influencer, but obviously that's no longer the case, so talk to us about that.
Oh, it's one of my favorite topics, actually. Sorry, I keep touching that microphone. It is one of my favorite topics because it's just blowing up in the States.
Huge.
And, people like to say that influencers are the new editors, but I like to say that not all editors are created equal. And it's a little bit like the wild, wild west out there when it comes to influencers, because just because you have 2 million followers doesn't mean that's right for your property and for you to host them. What I'm loving right now is there's, again, that influencer market is sort of starting to sort itself out a little bit. And you're finding the rise of the micro-influencer, where it's niche influencers. So influencers who have their own tribes of followers, who is very much engaged with this influencer. So it could be in design, it could be in culinary, and it could be in any of the niche markets. And sometimes we find that those are much more impactful on telling our story because these people have so much trust rather than blasting out something to 5 million people.
And I think to add to that, people hate choice. People are time poor nowadays as a rule, and I think that they want to know who to follow, what's hot, where should they go, what are the trends. So I think that influencers perfectly do that, but again, as Melanie said, you have to address it with caution.
I think part of what that's about is the importance of authenticity, to
Yes,
use that word
absolutely.
again, because it's all very well to have an influencer paid to sort of do a post for you, but does it really resonate? Does it seem credible? And I think most of the time it doesn't. When it's paid, you can kind of see it's paid. And what you need is people who really are passionate about your stories, about your products, to talk about them.
See, and that's the interesting thing, because we don't really pay our influencers in the States at all when it is a pure editorial play. So I personally haven't paid any influencers, but I know in China.
Well, we try not to,
it's
but
quite
in
different.
China to operate without any sort of pay to play is going to really limit what you can do.
Yeah.
Well, and it goes back to celebrities were the real traditional influencer, and now I think with the social platform, they are the new age of celebrities. But you have to approach it with the 3 R's. Are they relevant? Have they got the right reach? And is there resonance behind their posts and to your brand? So again,
And is it worth
approach
the
with
incredible
caution.
cost as well?
We don't pay.
Well, we don't pay either. I'm so sorry. That must be all of your
You're so
budget.
lucky.
And also, I think it comes full circle again, because traditional print editors are influencers too. So as an agency, we follow, and I call it casually stalking, pretty much every editor out there, from the New York Times to any of the magazines we work with, and that has what I say social begets print. And an example of that is we were following the Instagram feed of an editor-in-chief of one of the largest in-flight magazines in the States, and saw that he was vacationing with his family nearby a hotel that we have, and we just sent him a note saying, if you and your family just want to go for a drink or lunch, we'll love to host you. He went, loved the property. 3 months later, it was on the cover of of the largest in-flight magazine in America. And that was purely because we were watching what they were doing. And that is such a great, ROI on just hosting them for lunch,
Well,
but also
you're in
tracking
touch,
them.
you're connected, and that's why you're on social media. Don't be afraid. People are on there because they
engage.
want to be connected, they want to engage. So
And we also
don't be
find-
afraid to reach out.
We also find that a lot of the editors and media, especially in China, are themselves KOLs in the social space.
Very true.
So we might well be very interested in having them because of what they can do in print, but also what they're going to write on their social media channels, what they're going to post for us is as important, if not more so. With someone like Angelica Chung from Vogue magazine, we always want to invite her whenever we can, but largely it's because of what she puts in her WeChat channels, which reaches all the influencers and the
Right.
top fashion brands, celebrities and so on in China.
And sometimes thinking outside the traditional influencer box, if you will, one of the niches I love for some of our properties are the fashion influencers, and by that, they're actually the fashion PR people who have extraordinary contacts. So I took a group of fashion PR folks down to one of our incredible resorts in Puerto Rico, and I knew that they were being followed by every editor-in-chief of Vogue around the world, Elle, Harper's, you name it. And as a result, we ended up getting 4 incredible print photo shoots from some of the key source markets for that hotel. So we as PR professionals are no longer working in market when it comes to this. We're really supporting you on a global basis, and it has to be that sort of collaboration. It's the only way it works.
Have to put the fees up.
Sorry, we promised to do everything in 140 characters, but we can't even keep it to 140 words.
Melanie's from New York, so we forgive her. During lunch at my table, it was asked that how do you get a story into the New York Times or a paper like the New York Times when we refuse to accept freebies or a trip? And I think that's a good segue into how do you master the art of storytelling. And because really, ultimately, you still would like to get a big spread in the New York Times. And how do you do that?
It's trends. I'd say it's for the new. It very much depends on the media and the medium, but trends again are leading people's choices. And the New York Times has a very strict policy. But if we can pull in our news into a relevant trend, whether it's about the latest food fad or a new destination that's opening up or a new mode of travel, Beth, where are you? Don't worry, I'm sure you'll get some coverage in the New York Times. I think that it very much depends on trends, and that's where we come in as not only storytellers, but keeping abreast of the competition and the industry and what's happening and who's talking to what. And we're all very close. As you know, we all knew each other before today's panel. We all talk, we're all connected, and the social media space just makes it that more complex, yes, but of course, easier to understand and have a better grasp of what's going on.
I think the good storytelling is still the backbone of our industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
The media that
100%.
we use to tell the story may be different, may be more immediate, it may be through different intermediaries,
Yes.
but it's still about good storytelling that makes the difference between something that resonates and gets the word out there and gets the interest of the New York Times or not.
I joke that we have become as PR professionals, investigative reporters, and I don't mean that we are reporters necessarily. I just mean that, and actually the Times is a great example because I spoke with my team last week, and they had gone to meet with one of the editors of T magazine, which is the gorgeous glossy that the New York Times puts out, and they spoke to her because we have an opening coming up, and print publications just don't do big hotel opening features. It just doesn't happen. There's no space for that anymore. It's sort of boring. So they want a story now. They want it to be exclusive, and that's fine. And it may be an eighth or a quarter of a page, and that's fantastic. But not only do they want that, Ching Ching, they told us that they wanted a compelling story that would also be exclusive. So then we have to think, okay, when is this hotel opening? It may be an issue that's coming out that's all about craftsmanship. So we need to then go back and investigate with the property, how can we build a craftsmanship story around your opening to fit into what the New York Times is doing, into what T is doing.
Well, it definitely seems as if we have to come up with a lot more content now as PR agencies than we did before.
Yeah.
And in lots of different media as well. So I can see us ending up being video producers as well before too long.
And I think the message to all of you general managers out there and anyone that works on property, you are the guys on the ground that can feed your teams with the news that's happening. And, you know, don't be afraid to connect with the teams, even if it's a little bit of news. They can turn that into a trend. They can see what else is going on in the marketplace. So you've got to have that direct dialogue with your PR or your marketing team so that they can feed that out to social, to print, which of course, you know, I think for most of us does remain the bread and butter of what we do. So you have to keep that news coming, keep engaged with your destination. It's not just about what goes on in your four walls or within, you know, the surrounds of your hotel. It's what's happening with the local community. That is so important, and that gives us the tools that we can use to go out to the various audiences that we now have to network with.
Do you want to talk briefly about the death of the press release, Melanie?
You really
Might
have caught up on
to
this
this
one.
audience.
She was listening yesterday.
She was.
She loves that I said that. But, I mean, in my market, in the US market, and certainly in the luxury sector, we try and avoid the press release as much as we can. No one is reading it. And journalists always tell us, please don't send me a press release, and especially don't send me a press release. Do you not actually read what I write? Because this release has no relevance to me whatsoever. And I think, you know, we need to talk to the media and to the consumers through social media the same way that you talk to your guests. And it's on a very personalized one-to-one basis.
Agreed.
So every pitch that we do is individualized. Every morning I make myself go through all the publications and see what editor has written what story most recently and how would we have something that would suit them. It has to be tailored. We have to curate our stories on behalf of the clients. There's a lot of noise out there, and there are a lot of people wanting those column inches, and we have to cut through that clutter somehow.
And I think just to add to that, I think today's society is so short-fused, you know, time poor. I think that patience, patience. I mean, you know, I love to download and digest, you know, the New York Times or Vanity Fair, something that I can really get my teeth into. But my everyday news, we all want it in bites. We just want the summary of what's happening, where and when. And I think that goes for the press releases too. Gone are those days when you could send a two-pager to a journalist and they'll read it. They won't. They don't have time.
We're still somewhat lucky in this region that we can still get away with getting some results from press releases. It's not quite such a tough market, if you like, as the UK and the US.
If they're well written and they are topical and you're not inundating your audience, then of course they will pick them up.
And we also do have, you know, the media industry in certainly markets like Hong Kong and China. A lot of the editors are quite young and inexperienced, and so they really appreciate to have good
Yes,
content.
Paul, I was going to
as well.
segue to that. He works in Hong Kong, has been there for 25 years and works a lot with Chinese media. And as we learned earlier about the millennials, the wealthy millennials are younger, and the millionaires are younger, they're less experienced, and just discovering everything, you know, like last year, right? So talk a little bit more about how the PR experience is different in Asia due to these various cultural differences.
I think there's a lot less of that kind of cynicism from the Western media of, like, you know, I've seen all this before, this is nothing new, you know, I'm not interested, go away. There's more openness, I think, from a lot of the media here to look at what you've got to give them and to respect maybe that you have some knowledge in that area and want to sort of to give it some time. So I think that's definitely one area that's different. Just on a practical level, there's a lot of things we do in China that are very, very different to elsewhere, like creating WeChat groups with editors on behalf of certain clients so that they can have a much more sort of personal relationship with those media through their smartphones. So giving them little updates about what's happening in their hotels and so on.
Great. Anything else about working in Asia that's different for this audience?
Well, we can still, the media still very much rely on patronage and press trips and things like that. There's very, very few media in the region that have the budget to send their journalists on trips.
And we have the opposite. We have probably all the top publications that you want to be in the States cannot accept free trips.
See, London's I'd say London and Europe are the middle ground.
There are still a few here,
US.
but by and large, there's the facilitated press trip and the group press trip are still very much alive in this part of the world.
There's nothing for my brand. I truly believe that there's nothing better than experiencing the resorts firsthand. You know, and I would rather a journalist write about it having been there than trying to write about it having not been there, because it is such a bespoke experience. So
Seeing is believing.
Absolutely, and I think that, you know, you have to look at less is more, perhaps, and try and get as many as you can, but of that sort of specific segment that you want, and really work to get them there.
So, do we want to talk briefly about crisis management? And something as big as an accident to as small as bed bugs. Some would say bed bugs are worse. How do you manage that in the age of social media?
Very difficultly. You have to be very detailed, as I think we touched upon earlier, but social media is a fast train, and once it's going, it takes a while for it to stop. So in order to do that, to sort of bumper it along, you've got to send out some very emotive, some very soft messages, but most of all, talk to your customers. While there's a crisis happening, communicate, be open, be honest, because people can see between the lines. And as I said, as everybody here is a journalist, if there are people on the ground that are tweeting or posting on Facebook and you're saying something different, you will be found out. So you have to be honest.
Yeah. I would say that if you don't have a social media strategy for crisis in place, please go back and do that immediately. It's so much easier to get ahead of a runaway train than trying to catch it and sort of letting the tail wag the dog. You know, I think that it's also that social media actually actually help you in a crisis, because it can stop a lot of speculation. And if you, let's say you have 3 social media channels, you may decide that Instagram has one image with a key message, with referral back to, say, your Twitter account, and your Facebook may just have regular, you know, it may also have just irregular updates, but going back to Twitter again. I find that Twitter is the main news feed. I know that in New York, if I hear a lot of sirens going on outside, the first thing I do is go to Twitter to see what's happened, to see whether, you know, an explosion or fire or something. But I think that you need to get ahead of it, but also you need to communicate. And I think people just want to be heard. People want to know what's going on. And if you don't tell them, they will speculate for you. And then before you know it, all the false news is out there, and then it gets really difficult to put a lid on it.
To build the trust back up again and the confidence.
I think that's right. But basically, in a way, what makes a crisis is just not being prepared and not having anything to say when you need to say it. That's what essentially what makes it a crisis more than a situation. Most things that happen in the travel industry can be foreseen. They happened before, so you know you can know in advance. Not necessarily what. You don't know what the situation is, but you can know that certain types of situations will arise and what you're going to do if they do.
It's going to be
press that activation button.
Right.
So, and it's usually about, you know, knowing who the people that are involved, how do you contact them quickly, how do you get that holding statement ready, which has got the facts that we know so far that we're able to say.
Control the message, own that voice.
And the most important thing really is listening, finding out what people are already saying, what's already out there, because then you know how much you have to respond with, because obviously one thing you really don't want to do is, you know, a little incident that a few people know about. You don't want to blast that all over your website saying we're really sorry about this if most people don't know about it.
And I think it goes back to Achilles earlier was saying hospitality is all about service, service, service. So we as PRs, we with that public voice on our social platforms have to still offer that same level of service, service, whether it's in a crisis, whether we're promoting a news story, it still has to go back to the brand values that we all have.
That's a great way to end the segment, unless you want to add any. Yes, I think Anna had a last thing to add before you turn it over to questions.
I was doing some research, and you know, we've all discussed how impactful social media is and how this is really just the beginning. So, you know, I think we all agree that we have to take this seriously. But Oscar Wilde, over 100 years ago, famously said, there is one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. And I think that's really poignant for today. You have to be at that party. You've got to be in that conversation. You need to win your share of the audience.
Thank you so much. And on that, I'd like to turn it over to the audience for questions, please.
Bloggers. Running a hotel, particularly a luxury end hotel, we get a lot of requests, and these are coming through agents, very reputable agents. But it's sort of sometimes difficult to ascertain what type of blogger would be best suited for us. Now, I'll give you an example. What we tend to do is say, well, where is our market the weakest, which is, in our case, being based in Bali. Ours is in Europe. So anyone with a huge following we tend to go for those bloggers. But at the same time, we have a criteria which is very mandated what they need to do while they're with us, because otherwise some can get a bit lazy. But do you have any advice in terms of criteria or recommendations? Because I feel that we're going to get more and more, as hoteliers, we're going to get more and more inundated with blogger requests.
Yeah, it's a very valid question. I'd say size isn't everything. I don't think you can judge somebody by the amount of numbers that they have. Quality, not quantity, for sure. Look back at the posts they've done, look back at the followers, check that they haven't brought their followers. You can tend to see which accounts are fake that they might have. But go back to those 3 R's: relevance, resonance, and reach. So reach with caution, of course, but just make sure that you're not putting your brand and not trusting your brand with somebody that you're not familiar with. So spend time talking to them, do the research, look at where else they've been, and just check that the images that they're portraying and the words they're using really fit with who you are and your brand identity.
Exactly. I mean, I think I look at their content and I think to myself, is this content that they have done in the past content that I would want to share on my clients' channels? Is there a match? Does it make sense? And that speaks to that as well. I think it's really important because we do get inundated. You know, every mummy blogger with a photographer husband and 6 children who want a week, you know, in Venice during the film festival. I mean, it happens all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I would say the first thing to do, I mean, and you can with bloggers, is you can look back at what they've done before and just see if you think, would I like this kind of thing said about my hotel? And if the answer is yes, then that's a good start.
Yeah.
If next thing, well, only 3 people have read it, then maybe not. But I think that first of all, it's the relevance and the quality of that person's work.
There are things like clout scores and things like that. I mean, I don't know how accurate they are for what we're doing, but I think it's really just doing a bit of homework and asking around as well with your agencies and other people. Ask them who's hosted them in the past and see if they've been happy with it.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to say no.
Yeah, please.
Don't be afraid to say no, and I think sometimes that's hard for us.
I mean, it is.
as
It's something
communicators.
that we face as the challenges. You know, professionals that are doing this a lot is unlike media, where there are kind of rules of engagement that by and large people behave professionally by. With bloggers, it's not necessarily the case. You know, we might recommend a blogger to a hotel and then get badly bitten by some somewhat unprofessional behaviour.
I was just wondering if there was a sort of perfect link up or a number to have bloggers, influencers, and media to sort of try and get
Good
across
question.
all 3 channels.
Speaking on behalf of Aman, we've been quite slow to the digital world. It's something we've approached with great caution. And we were always, and still are, quite concerned that we don't want to off-put our Aman junkies, who are our most loyal guests. But I think the thinking behind that now is that those more traditional customers will still continue to search for information in the more traditional ways. And I think the millennials now are all on social. That is where they are. That is the conversations they're having. So perhaps the traditional medium or your traditional customers won't see the conversations that you're having in the digital space, and vice versa. So there are different messages that need to be had, but I'd say that it places equal importance. And I think in terms of time, because it is 24/7, you know, I can speak from the experience I have, it does consume a huge amount of your time, and it's
also,
ongoing.
Absolutely. And let's say, for example, you have a hotel or a product that hasn't got any news coming out, or nothing new is happening, and you have to sort of scrape the barrel to get a print story. Then you can fill those empty spaces throughout the year, or those periods where you have lulls, with influencers, and they can help you create content. So don't forget that you should negotiate with them at the same time when they come to stay with you. I also need 60 images, which I can use throughout the year to build out my own channels, however many images it is. But negotiate with them, because they will work with you, and they also want to promote themselves to a certain degree. So I think that everything has its place. It really depends on sort of the news cycle that you have as well, I think.
Paul, did you have anything?
I don't really have an answer as to what the split should be either, but I agree that they're all important. I think probably we tend to focus a bit more on traditional media just because it's still harder to get in some ways. It still requires more effort, and it needs more orchestration, whereas some of the others can fall into place slightly more easily.